work ethic is obviously very important as well.
When it's all said and done, I want 5 quarterbacks.
Recruiting, most important part of the game.
Do you want me to call you Mike or Magic? Because, there's the whole Magic. Yeah, I don't want to go there.
Hey everybody, it's Magic. I'm your host for This, That, and the Other. And it looks like we've got T-Bill who's joined us. T-Bill, are you with us? I see his face, don't hear any audio. He's there. Anyway, we're going to progress on. Tonight, don't know who's coming on board. Not quite sure who all's planning to make it in tonight, but we do have quite a few things to go over. So we're going to discuss those, and anybody that wants to join us can do so. They can jump right on in whenever they get on board, and we can discuss whatever's being presented from the boards or whatever the subject matter happens to be tonight. But I do want to mention that it is baseball season. Finally, they got started. Tonight, I believe, are the first set of games. So who knows who'll be here or who knows who won't be here because of baseball. So we'll just have to see. Anyway, the questions that we've got this week on the forum are pretty much just focused on the whole recruiting situation. Primarily, how do you recruit? Who do you recruit? What do you go for? Want to talk. The first question is Sports Douche. She asks, I just got over my first elite program. How is recruiting an elite different from recruiting at a Power 5 school? And note, not just a D1A school, but a Power 5. Actually, there are 14 elite programs right now in Gridiron Dynasty, and honestly, they're not all the same when it comes to recruiting. I've been fortunate enough to have had an opportunity to coach at quite a few of them, and it just seems that some of them are a bit more difficult to recruit from than others, and I think primarily it's because of the people that are around them and not so much their specific location. For instance, Oklahoma, not far away from Nebraska. You even have an opportunity where Notre Dame or Ohio State will come into some of that territory. But Texas is a big part of that. And even Alabama sneaks up sometimes and tries to get some recruits. So Oklahoma is centrally located, which makes that elite a little more challenging from an aspect of having other schools nearby that can pick and choose recruits and create some battles. But on the positive side, there are a lot more recruits in that area from which to choose. So you have to balance the whole fact of more dominant elite schools in the area, but you have more recruits to choose from as well. And mentioning Nebraska, you've got Michigan that messes with Nebraska and vice versa. But other than that, there's not really, in my experience, a whole lot of recruits in that Nebraska area. So that makes it tough. The school down at the tip of Florida, Miami, of course, man, they have to go through everybody to recruit. But a blessing for them is there are quite a few quality recruits in that Florida tip every year without fail. There's always 3 or 4 good ones in the top 5 position. But, the bad thing is if you've got a solid coach at Southern Florida or South Florida, Central Florida, and of course you've got Florida, you got to battle through if you're going to recruit somebody outside of the state of Florida. And Florida State's up there in that panhandle. It makes it difficult if there's a season in Miami where there's not a whole lot of recruits to choose from, which happens from time to time. But again, there are some quality recruits down there. So even though it's geographically located away from a lot of the other places, it can be fruitful from time to time. Penn State, no doubt about it, one of the more fertile, best recruiting grounds in all of Gridiron Dynasty from which to recruit. Sure, you're in close proximity to some quality schools like the Ohio States and even some of the Big East schools or the ACC schools that may not be elite. But, man, there's so much talent in that Pennsylvania area that Penn State can pretty much pick and choose who they want once they've got a coach in that position that's been there for a few years and had the ability to rack up some bowl money and return that recruiting money year to year. So as far as that goes, yeah, the difference is basically you get a little more advantage when it comes to a particular recruit just because you're an elite. But more times than not, that's really negated because a lot of the battles that you encounter as an elite are with other elites more times than not. Because usually if it's not an elite, they either back off because you're an elite and it's a very short recruiting battle, or you simply smash them with the money and advantage that you have that the battle doesn't last so long. So that answers that one. Hopefully that answers that question for you. Now we've got some questions from a different individual. This is, and I hope I'm saying the name right, DeBeck. And he asked or tells us that he usually signs his entire first class at the initial signing, but occasionally he still has one or two battles at the time. How should he make better use of the remaining recruiting time? Well, that can be difficult, actually, to nail down as to what to do with that time. It all depends on those other battles you have. Where are you in regards to having a good handle on an idea if those guys are going to come to you or not? Have they mentioned they're coming to you in the email reply or the recruit replies that you get? And that tells you a lot as far as what you need to do. Do you need to be patient and wait for them to go ahead and sign, or do you need to keep an eye out to see if the coach you're battling with or coaches are putting more money in there, flipping that recruit to them? Depending on which way that goes, dictates what you could or could not or should not do. For instance, if they're in your favor, leaning to you, doesn't seem like anybody else is going to flip them, and if they're not a top pick for you per se, there may be an opportunity to take that guy that you would consider a top pick and bump him down because somebody else is out there that's a little bit better. So you get an opportunity there to look at that and make an assessment. Do you need to go ahead and just stick with the guy that you're in a battle with that's leaning to you? Or do you go ahead and roll the dice and try to get that guy that has become available because he was an undecided and an elite had him, and now the elite signed his class, and this guy's available, and everybody else has pretty much signed their class. And as time goes on, you see that he's undecided or available to you. Those are decisions that you have to make given the situation at hand. And as I mentioned, one of the things to be concerned with is the status of the recruits that you're in the battle with. Are they coming to you, or have they already told you that they're going somewhere else and you've pretty much decided that you can't beat that particular player, that particular coach because of a money situation? So a couple different ways you can go. Now, he also asks, how much of your after initial signing recruiting is deliberate and how much is just mainly because it didn't get done initially? It's kind of hard for me to wade through that one and understand exactly what you're asking. After the initial recruiting has been signed and you've got some left, I mean, that you know, if you've signed everybody, you're done. There's really nothing else you can do unless you're trying to waste money and pester some other coach with his recruits. But, you know, one of the things that I like to do is solidify the class or the majority of it as soon as possible. Don't play around. Don't wait. You know who you want. You know who your competition is. You know who's out there. Get those guys, lean into your school, get them green for you, and make an opportunity for yourself to have a good class by not dawdling and waiting, because a lot of times some of these other coaches see that you've got a guy green and you're not signing him, and that tells them that he's a backup and he's ripe for picking. Or maybe, you know, he turned green to you for nothing more than a phone call or a letter. So, you know, I would go ahead and sign the guys that I intend to sign right away And then anything after that is for the intention of completing the class and making it as best that I possibly can. Now, that probably didn't answer your question, but that's about the way I understood it, and hopefully it provided some insight. He also said, how do you decide which and how many openings to leave after initial signing? Kind of answered that in my previous assessment of the question. I try not to. I don't want to leave any openings if I don't have to. And what I mean by don't have to is, if I'm engaged in some battles, of course, you're going to have some openings. So you try to win the battles up front early as you possibly can. I'm not one of the coaches who, when it comes to recruiting, will put together let's say I've got 15 scholarships to fill and I'm in 18 battles. I've seen that from some coaches, or they'll have a 15-man class to sign. They have signed 10, and now they're still engaged in 7, 8, or 9 battles. I just don't see the point in that. Pick the guys you want and go after them. But at the same time, you can offset some of your potential losses by having been out recruited and not being able to sign the guys that were your picks by getting some of those that are undecided. And more times than not, when it comes to getting a player on your roster that is undecided late in the recruiting game, he may be a lesser quality player than you would normally target, but he will generally be a better quality player than if you don't sign somebody and you let your AC, your assistant coach, sign a recruit for you. Because usually when that happens, those guys are, I won't say the bottom of the barrel, but there's a lot more looking up for them than there is looking down. I mean, they're down there at the bottom. There's not a whole lot to see beneath them. They're looking up to see anybody and everybody. And, that's not the kind of player I want on my roster. And a good coach surely doesn't want those kind of players on his roster. One of the things that a lot of people don't understand is the difference between a sim recruit on a roster that was put there when a coach was actually in charge of that roster, a human coach. Those players, as sim players, like I said, are going to be bottom of the barrel. And if you've got a roster that doesn't have a coach on it, a human coach, those players are going to be much, much better than the assistant coach players you get on your roster because you can't sign your full class. And the reason is the recruiting system is set up to where initially, as we all know, there are going to be recruits that have 1, 2, 3 schools on them as soon as the recruiting window opens up. And those are quality recruits, as you can see. They're the top of the bunch out there. So those are the ones that human coaches are trying to knock off. And that is done so that the teams that don't have human coaches don't become so decimated that no one will ever want them when they sign into a world to move up through the ranks. If we allowed non-human coach teams to sign the quality of players that the assistant coach will sign for a human team, once that human has not signed all his recruits, that sim player, if you will, if we let a team that is not human coached become inundated with those lack of quality players, that winning against sims would be even more easier than it is now. I mean, there's no reason for a team that doesn't have a human coach to be competitive. And WIS has done what they can to make sure that those rosters do from time to time get some very good players. And it wouldn't surprise me to see quite a few of them in the top 20 of a recruiting cycle, because those sims get those dibs on those players early, and sometimes coaches just don't knock them off. So that makes the parity a little bit more enjoyable throughout for the human coach teams, as well as the games going up against the sim. Generally you beat the sims, but a human coach team can usually come into a perennial sim team and turn it around and make it a competitive team if he knows what he's doing, given a couple, 2, probably more than likely 3 or 4 years. So, that's one of the good things I like about the game. Totally off the wall from what the answer was intended to give you, but again, hopefully you got a little bit of something out of that. Let's see. Did we do this one? How do you decide which teams to battle after initial signing, Sims or humans? Partly based on how many openings they have. Excuse me. If it really truly depends on your team's needs, what you have filled, and therefore highlighting your team's remaining needs, but also, and probably more importantly, is how much money you have left. So given how much money you have left will kind of drive you to the decision of, are you going to battle Sims or are you going to battle humans? Now, a subcomponent of that, when you're talking about battling humans, is you really need to know how that recruit was positioned when recruiting started. And what I mean by that is, did he initially have 3 sim schools already on him, or was he an undecided that a human coach turned green to him for next to nothing? That right there is critical knowledge, because if it's a recruit that used to be leaning to 3 or 2 or 1 sim school, well, you know that it's going to take quite a few recruiting efforts, such as your home visits, your campus visits, scouts, etc., to get that guy considering you, even if he's currently considering a human coach. On the other hand, if that recruit is being green or is green for a human coach, and he was undecided when the cycle started, a home visit or a assistant coach and a home visit, or assistant coach scout and a campus visit, may turn him green for you. It all depends. So that little nugget of knowledge is something that you really need to know beforehand. The big thing that I see that coaches have an issue with is when it comes time to make that determination or come time to make that assessment, they have no idea, because they didn't look at a larger list than they were initially focusing on, or make notes, or use a spreadsheet, or keep a detailed list, or whatever the case may be, so that, days into recruiting and the situation is such where they need to do just that, decide on going after a sim or humans. The first thing you have to ask yourself is, what was the initial position of that particular recruit? How was he set up when recruiting started? Was he being recruited by Sims already, or was he undecided? Then you can look at, okay, now he is still being recruited by Sims, or, he has a coach. If he's still being recruited by Sims, understand that they continue to recruit. So it will be harder to knock the Sims off of that recruit day 4, day 5 of recruiting than it would have been day 1 or day 2. So they keep putting money into this recruit periodically as the recruiting time lapses. Now, with the human coming on, that's all bets are off. Now, what I mean by that is, if it's a 3-school situation on a sim, and he's red for you, but he likes these 3 schools, and a human coach comes in early on in the recruiting period and knocks those 3 sims off, more than likely he's not going to keep putting money into that particular recruit. The biggest question I have is, if he went through the trouble of knocking off 3 sims from a recruit, why not go ahead and sign him? Unless he's got so much money, then he can afford to do that for a backup. Now, I don't know about you, but for me, it's usually less likely that I've got a ton of money to spend on knocking off 3 sims as a backup. My backups generally consist of previously undecided. So again, do you decide to go hard after sims or humans? Their openings, that would tell you a lot about where they are in money. For instance, if a coach has got, let's use the same 15-man signing that year, and he's got 15 open scholarships. Let's say that it's day 4, day 5 in the recruiting period, and you look and see, okay, this guy out of his 15, he has signed 10. So he's got 5 scholarships that he needs to sign, and you look and see that he's on 2 battles, nobody else green for him. Well, that can mean that he's willing to accept some sims in order to increase his opportunity of landing some of the guys he's in the battle for. Or it could mean that he just wants to go ahead and let these 2 battles play through to see where he's at so that he can determine how much money to spend per recruit given what the situation or the outcome is of the 2 battles he's in. And what I mean by that is if he signs those 2, then his X number of remaining recruiting dollars will go a lot further over the next 3 guys that he needs to sign versus if he doesn't sign the 2 guys he's in a battle with. And now that X number of dollars has got to be spread a little thin across those additional recruits that he's going to have to sign. So, it's partly based on how many openings they have. Sure. It's partly based on humans. It's partly based on sims. But again, probably the biggest or the first thing I look for is the existing status of that recruit when recruiting started. So if you're not doing it now, make a point to go a little bit deeper in that list of recruits. And if nothing else, just identify in one way, shape, or form who the undecideds are so that later on in the recruiting cycle, you'll know, and that'll give you a leg up, if you will, on deciding what to do for the potential battles. And another one by him, we've got one more after this. Do you battle or just hope to win a war of attrition? Do you learn something from your neighbors, typically running low on funds, or do they save for a war chest, making them better or worse target? Do I battle or just hope to win a war of attrition? I hate to battle. Bottom line. I mean, there's so many unknowns in the battle from, the coach you're battling with, his funds, how much money he's throwing at the guy in relationship to activity. And again, let me clarify. I think we said it on a previous show. Recruiting is not about the money. It's about the effort. So if you're next door to a guy, a recruit, and you're putting 2 campus visits on him, that's roughly $1,600. If I'm clean across the country and I'm putting 2 campus visits on the guy, that could be to $4,000, if not more. So where you're spending $1,600 on a player, and I'm spending $4,000 on the player, you would think I've done more recruiting when truth is we've done the same amount. We've each had him with 2 campus visits. So, you could look at it from an aspect of the money shouldn't dictate where you stand with the recruit. It's the effort. So if you can gauge how much you're throwing into a recruit and he's still yellow, or you're flipping back and forth between the 2 coaches, by knowing his proximity and kind of getting a good understanding of how much he's spending per activity or per effort, will kind of tell you where you are or where you potentially can be in this particular battle. When it comes to attrition, I'm assuming you mean that eventually their money runs out. Well, same is true for yourself. That coach could be hoping the same thing and doing nothing else but trying to drain you of money in hopes that he gets the recruit. So that's a 2-way street. And do you learn something from your neighbors, typically running low on funds? Over a period of time when you're in one place or you're familiar with an individual coach and his recruiting strategy, you can learn, pay attention, do some research and some analysis, even post signing, do some analysis, see where the guys are coming from. They're on his roster. And based on the quality of those players and the location they came from, you can get an idea of who was on them at one point or another. But more importantly, you can kind of gauge to see how much the coach spent on him, especially if you know ahead of time, was the guy undecided or did he have 3 sims on him? So knowing that, you can get an understanding of where that particular coach likes to put his money, how he likes to spend it. Does he do it all on the front end? Does he save some for the tail end of recruiting? Those are things that you learn from being in the same place and dealing with the same coaches over an extended period of time. I've battled coaches that historically just built up war chest money. And you look at their roster and you see that every recruit on his team is within his 360. You know that he's not spending a whole lot of money unless those guys were in battles or part of battles. And a lot of times, once you've been there for a while, the longer you're at a school, the fewer battles you tend to get into, has been my experience. So you can look at that information and see, who's building up the war chest. And I know I've seen guys who every year just sign guys right in their backyard. And you know that even though it's a quarter of your remaining balance that carries over, that can be substantial. Me personally, it all depends. Sometimes I have a lot left over. Sometimes I don't. I remember one year at Valdosta, down in D2, I was fortunate enough to have so many quality players right there in my backyard that I didn't even spend half of my recruiting budget. And when it was all said and done, I had players that were green to me that were better than some of the other players out there, that I didn't even need to use them as backup and go after the other ones. I had the best guys right there in my neighborhood. So when that recruiting season ended, like I said, I had a half of my recruiting budget left over. Well, you only carry over a quarter of that, so it wasn't a whole lot left when it was all said and done. But one of the things that you need to understand too about these other coaches is, do they do the same thing every year? Because you can be led astray by believing that a particular coach likes to spend his money all up front and get a jump on him the next year, only to find out that that's the year he decided to keep some in reserve. And now late in the game, when you don't have a lot of recruiting money left, this coach has got his bankroll whipped out, and now he's knocking your recruits green for him one after the other. So that's another issue that you need to be aware of when it comes to the other coaches is, are they consistent year after year after year, or are they like me, do things a little bit different every year? All right, let's see who we got now. This is another question. Oh, same one from him. How much of your budget is saved after initial signings? Is your recruiting different as far as geography goes after initial signings? I kind of answered that with the last answer as well. It all depends on how your class is forming, how they're falling into place, what you're doing with those recruits that are available to you. You get them on the roster or you get them signed to your school, then you're going to have money left over. Now, do you want to go ahead and reserve that scholarship and keep him as a potential backup, kind of like what I was talking about with the Valdosta team I had several years ago, and reach out and go a little bit further, even if you have to engage in a battle, to possibly get a recruit that's going to be better for your team than the one that's already green for you that you're willing to sign right now. Now, one of the downfalls of that is, and I recently did it in a recruiting opportunity, another coach may see that he's green for quite a few spells, and that's all it takes for him to say, you know what, this guy doesn't want him or he's a backup, I'm going to go get him, and boom, he's gone. And then if the person that you're trying to get, that you're reaching across country for, if that falls through and now you don't lock in that recruit, you leave yourself with an opportunity to get one of those dreaded Sim AI signees that you don't want on your roster. So it's not so much of a dictated amount that I try to save. I basically try to field the best class that I can with the money available. And the only time that I truly have money, just gobs of it left over, is when I've been fortunate enough to have quality recruits in my backyard that I go ahead and sign. I don't skimp on talent for the purpose of having recruiting money at the end of signings so that I can roll a quarter of that over the next year. I would go ahead and much rather spend that remaining 3 quarters that doesn't get rolled over into signing a better recruit or a recruit that will help the team in the long run. So those are some of the possibilities in regards to geography goes. Now, as far as geography, more specifically, I'm going to look at this question as saying or believing that you're asking where you are as far as your school versus the recruits are. And what I mean by that is your recruiting different as far as geography goes after initial signings? For instance, if I'm in the middle of the U.S., then I can probably take that opportunity to reach out and broaden my net, if you will, of potential signees, because I'm not going to have to go extremely far to possibly bump into some quality recruits. And that's if I'm, centrally located in the U.S. or in a hotbed of recruits nearby. If I'm in West Virginia, I can extend up into Pennsylvania and potentially get some recruits that way, or even North Carolina all the way up to Pennsylvania. Now, if you're at, let's say, Humboldt out in California, and California, for whatever reason, that year is barren, or you've got a huge class to sign, and all the quality players that are within, the state of California or within that 360, you've pretty much scoured over, and you've got the cream of the crop, and you've signed them, or they're green for you, and you've got money left over. If there are no quality recruits in the immediate footstep away from that 360, beyond Utah, into Colorado, or into Oklahoma, Michigan. I mean, you're stretching your recruiting budget, what's left over, to sign those last few guys. That would be a little more of a challenge to get those guys signed and recruited decently in order to sign them than if you were centrally located and you were able to pick up some guys within, let's say, a 500-mile perimeter versus a 1,200-mile stretch from California. And God forbid if you're in Hawaii. I mean, Hawaii is just not one of those places I like to recruit from, period. Let's see. The gentleman that was on here earlier, T-Bill, says he started a thread in Gridiron Forum concerning pass and middle, and he's been trying to flood the zone. Is it considered much better strategy to send 2 receivers very short and the wide receivers deep to isolate the running back for a possible one-on-one? That's something I've done in the past. Primarily, one of the things I did early on was in the belief that a wide receiver who is running a pattern down the field will drag a defender with him. So essentially taking a potential tackler out of the play. Giving that as the truth, then sending 2 wide receivers deep while you've got a tight end or even a running back in the middle of the field, and you're throwing a middle pass, I would think that the completion percentage for that opportunity would be greater, given all things are equal, than if you flooded the zone and had 5 people there. But again, now we're looking at what are the targets for the quarterback. Now that you've got your formation set up and you're going middle, do you have your tight end, your 2 running backs for a pro set, for instance, 1 tight end, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers? If they're all going middle and you've got a 20% target allocated to each of those, and the quarterback is going through his progressions and looking to see who's open or looking to see who is covered, well, if you've got 2 wide receivers downfield and you've got a tight end in the middle and 2 running backs who are blocking, and you don't have any first look percentages to those wide receivers, and you've got 100% on that tight end, your quarterback has nowhere to go but to that tight end. And that all completion percentage there depends on the quarterback's arm strength, his technique, how is he going to get that ball in there if the guy's covered? Is he going to throw it if he's covered? So work with that and see what works best for you, because I guarantee you that whatever you decide or whatever you discover will possibly change from one season to another, simply because of the makeup of your team. You could do it this year and have a crappy tight end for a receiving tight end, and your completion percentage is in the basement. You're not having any success. And then the next season, the only thing you change is you recruit a player the previous year who's now had a chance to get his formation IQ up. His work ethic has bumped those numbers up, and now he's better than the tight end you had the previous year, and your success rate is higher. So the personnel makeup is a factor as well, not just the position on the field and who you're looking at, but the actual individual filling that position or filling the role as a quarterback, because from one quarterback to another, you're going to have different results. I mean, that's a given. You could have a guy this year that is head and shoulders above the guy you'll have next year, and your success rate will plummet just because you've got a worse quarterback than you had the year before. Let's see. He said, recruiting transparency is what he's talking about here. He believes that if he lost a recruit battle, you should be able to see the recruits' offers from the other coaches. Interesting idea. He thinks that is needed to show prestige edge and what you're battling. He has an elite in Oklahoma and Lehigh and decided to leave Florida to go to Temple. Now that he'll most likely have the prestige edge, I don't think it's necessary to hide that or what that is an advantage. I don't think going from Florida to Temple is a prestige edge, honestly, because remember, we've got 14 teams in Gridiron Dynasty that are what you can consider elite. So if prestige is equal to elite, which I think quality of the understanding, the quality of elite and the quality of prestige being the same, I believe they're one and the same in my book. So yeah, that's an interesting twist on being able to see once the battle's over. But again, what truly does that do for you as a coach going into subsequent years, other than you now have a better understanding of what it takes for him to battle with? He would also, in a reciprocal manner, should be allowed to see what the loser of that particular battle put into a receiver, or put into a recruit. Fair is fair, So it would be a nuance that could possibly be helpful in some regards initially, but I think over time, there's such a thing as information saturation, to where you get, and think about this, seldom do we ever battle just one time or one recruit for a recruiting cycle. There's always opportunities that come up that you didn't expect or anticipate, where you're actually battling several coaches or one coach on multiple recruits. That being the case, when you get that information back post-recruiting signings, that's a lot of information that you need to keep track of and then understand and categorize or compartmentalize so that you can actually use it to the good. How much value is gained in your potential recruiting in subsequent years to know how much a coach, how much effort he put into a recruit. And now you're having to keep that information on multiple recruits in multiple worlds. I just don't know that it's something that would return the value that we believe it may return for us. And honestly, there is some things that people will look at and say, hey, in real life, you don't know the discussions that we had with recruits in regards to coaches. Now, you'll know the campus visits and the in-home visits. I mean, that's public knowledge for the most part. But there can be promises made that you're not aware of. For instance, similar to GD, you've got here in Gridiron Dynasty, promises of starting, promises of playing time, booster gifts, which is a whole nother discussion. So there are some of those secrets that you don't quite understand because you don't have access to it or privilege to that information. So should that be revealed here? It's good food for thought and definitely good forum discussion material as well. And he says he has a battle at Penn State. It would be important to know what his prestige edge is. Well, again, I don't know that prestige edge or prestige is so much more of a factor than him being an elite. I believe that an elite with low prestige can overcome a Power 5 that has decent prestige just because he has that elite advantage. Now, I will say this. I have noticed over the many years, even if I'm at a Power 5, as an elite, it takes me about, I'm thinking probably about half of the visits, campus visits, for instance, to knock a recruit off of Sims from an elite than it does if I'm at a Power 5. And if I'm at a non-Power 5 conference, D1A, oh my gosh, it's a lot of effort in order to do that. So knowing the Gridiron Dynasty identified elites, which are those 14 teams, and then understanding your Power 5 conference teams, I think that information is probably more valuable in the trenches to knowing how to recruit or knowing how to battle than knowing what a particular school's prestige is, because I honestly think the prestige level of that particular school, or any school for that matter, is not as important as the elite status is. So again, an elite with poor prestige, I think, is going to trounce a non-elite with decent prestige or even good prestige just for the fact that he's an elite. So I may be wrong. And if anybody else out there has information to that, that would be awesome to have that concrete, solid data to know, because that's one of the things that is the mystery of GD right now, is the unknown, those behind the wall data crunching numbers that go on and the little triggers, if you will. On to another topic. I hope we've answered all of DeBeck, I believe it was, and T-Bills. The other question that I had that was on the board is in regards to boosters. And for the guys that have been playing this for years, they know my position on booster gifts. I mean, yeah, it's part of the game. Granted, you're more than welcome to use it. Have a nut. Enjoy yourself. Send that recruit a car, whatever you want. But also understand that there are repercussions if you're caught. So given the fact that there are repercussions for doing an activity, even though it's built into GD, is where I set my flag and say that's cheating, or, that's just not good ethics in my book. The same is for information being shared between two coaches, especially in recruiting. GD has it so that an individual can only know his information. But if two individuals talk on the phone, that information is readily available to either one of them. There's nothing GD has done or can do to prevent that from happening. However, there are repercussions for both of those coaches should, the What If Sports customer support team find out that that's going on, that whole collusion thing that we see pop up every couple of years. So the reason I bring those two examples up is one is inherent to GD as far as a built-in feature, such as the booster gifts. And one is a byproduct of the fact that GD can't control communications between humans. Both of those activities have repercussions. Both of those activities, because they have repercussions, tell me that they're wrong. We do not get punished. Now, we're talking, I need to be careful how I say this, because a lot of people, say the no good deed goes unpunished. But in terms of playing this game, you don't get punished for doing things right. You don't get punished for sending the recruit the right amount of campus visits or head coaching visits or scouts or whatever to get him to sign to you, unless you consider the fact that somebody can come in behind you or during a battle, or even if you've got the recruit considering you come in at the last minute and offer him a car or a stereo or who knows what else. And now you're essentially being punished for your good deeds of recruiting properly because this other coach has jumped in and done something underhanded, such as booster gifts, to get the recruit to turn to him. Again, I understand why people do it. And I have, nothing to say in regards to whether GD should get rid of that. No, leave it there. It's part of the game. In some cases, it works. In some cases, it doesn't. But as I mentioned on the boards earlier today, I would like to see that anytime somebody uses a booster gift and is found out and investigated, that the amount of money that a coach that was in a battle with that individual spent on that particular recruit, that the following year, that coach gets that money in his recruiting budget. And you'll have to forget, I think it was Mojo, maybe it was Mojo. I can't recall now, and forgive me for being wrong if I am, but another coach piped in and said it would be nice if the offending coach would have to forfeit that restitution from his recruiting budget. I think that would be awesome. I honestly think that would carry a lot more weight in restricting some of those nefarious activities than an individual who was simply, dropped in his reputation rankings from an A+ down to a C- or an F, or whatever the case may be, and having that particular recruit suspended for 3 games. That's why a lot of coaches do it, and the ones that get away with it are smiling even bigger. But even the coaches who just lost an AirPod, forgive me, and even the coaches who simply choose to use booster gifts and get caught still consider it a price of business. And they're willing to accept the fact that they have a reputation ding that now takes 3 or 4 years to repair. But by golly, they've got this stud recruit on their team that they could normally not otherwise have on their roster. And, there are times when 1 or 2 decent players can really make or break a season, especially now that we no longer have those injuries that we had early on in the inception of What If Sports, where you could be having a great season and your quarterback goes down because his collarbone came out of his kneecap. We saw some strange injuries. But anyway, that's me. I'll get off that soapbox. Again, I don't care if people use them as far as their ability to do so, but I do believe it's not right. It's an ethical thing. And maybe Gridiron Dynasty will see it to change it one of these days to where the punishment is a bit more severe than it is now, because lack of punishment, or the punishment being what it is, I can see why a lot of guys try to get away with it. And again, a lot of guys do get away with it, and more power to you. But I know when it happens to me, you can tell, and karma's a bitch. And I think I said that today on the forum, and it doesn't matter what world you're in. You become to be known for a coach who does things beneath the table, as they say. But anyway, enough about that. Like I said, we're here to enjoy the fact that What If Sports is hopefully going to be around for many more years to come. It's a great game for those tuning in who've never played. I highly, highly recommend going to the What If Sports website and taking your stab at being a coach, getting a team from Division III all the way up to a Division 1A elite, seeing if you can compete and seeing if all those times that you were sitting there and watching college football, being the armchair quarterback, if your comments, thoughts, or suggestions pair out to be true. Do they actually, cut the mustard? And this is a good place to find out. Granted, it's X's and O's, ones and zeros, but there's a lot of fun to be had, a lot of strategy, a lot of camaraderie has been built, a lot of guys that have remained friends for years and years and years. And then you get guys who really stand out that bring a lot to What If Sports outside of the actual What If Sports employees. And one of those is Bob Hazelwood, as we're all familiar from the people that play the game with the GD reports. And if you've ever looked at the GD reports to see where you fared in recruiting or where your team was ranked based on its current makeup, I mean, that's a lot of good information that he provides. And, he's not an employee of Gridiron Dynasty or What If Sports. So he does that out of the goodness of his heart, for the passion he has for data crunching, for computers, and for the game of football, and particularly for this platform. So if you've got an opportunity to look at those, you know how valuable that information is. Donate. Every little bit counts. For crying out loud. The guy is doing it for free. Your donations, show him, tangibly that his material that he provides is valued by us. Every now and then you got to pay for the food you eat. So reach out there, do what you can to help him out. Get on that Gridiron Dynasty game, play it, learn it, love it, but also support Bob with his GD reports. Anyway, this is Magic. I'm going to go ahead and sign off here. We had no guest today, but hopefully you guys have learned something, and I've run my mouth for almost an hour. My wife is right. Anyway, I hope you guys have enjoyed this as much as I have, and we definitely look forward to seeing you guys in the future on here. So again, don't hesitate, log on, come visit with us, pop in, share your comments, your questions. That's why it's here. It's for you to join us and discuss things from time to time. Anything, anytime, holler at me. We'll be here every Thursday night, 9 o'clock. I'm Magic. This is This, That, and the Other. Thank you for tuning in.